at the local level as a school district superintendent, you have a good contractor, you can reduce that 10 to 5 because the law provides for you to do that. So in eliminating that, what we lose is a bargaining concept where there's a performance and we can say, great, we'll reduce. Now, if all of you and us as consumers were to have this imposed upon us for spending our private dollars, we would probably react rather negatively. That Mr. Fuhrer, if you were building a home or adding to your home and you were compelled to pay 95% of whatever the pay request is to the contractor that's adding to your home, notwithstanding how they're performing, I don't think that as a consumer you would be pleased about that. But that's essentially what this bill does to public agencies. So that's a second point. A third point is that there's no policy balance in this bill. We are, as public agencies, supposed to lose this ability to negotiate down to the 5%. But what is it that we gain? We still have the low bid concept where we have to take that low bid and award to that low bid and deal with a contractor no matter what that contractor's record has been like, good or bad in the past. We believe that this bill, and we can certainly change our position on this bill and urge the other public agencies too to do that, if we have some ability to choose the contractor. There's been mention of the state college system and others being able to deal with the 5%. Well, they're a lot bigger than school districts are. We have school districts in California that have 100 pupils and some that have 700,000. So we have 1,000 districts with varying levels of the ability to bear the burden of a contractor that is not meeting their needs. But what does CSU have an opportunity to do? They have an opportunity to use the best value. So if that kind of a concept were, Mr. Padilla, to be added into your bill where there is some choice of the kind of contractor, and then we can say that we would have to, if we have a good contractor, retain only 5%, then I think we would look at this bill very differently. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Others in opposition?
Mr. Chair and members, Kyle Packham on behalf of the California Special Districts Association. We represent special districts throughout the state, including fire protection districts, water districts, recreation and parks districts. And like Tom was saying, our members range in size from SMUD, a very large member, down to small rural fire protection districts that maybe will be building a firehouse every once in a while. And so similar to what he was saying, the amount of capital, the size of their budgets varies in size, some of them very small. We empathize with what the contractors are saying, and certainly we would love to be able to help them, but our goal as a public entity is to deliver projects on time and to deliver projects for the taxpayers and for the people who are using them. Our goal is not to simply just extend the contractors and give them a higher profit margin. We can certainly, we are receiving plenty of bids on most of our projects. There are bids coming in, and if there weren't, we would have the opportunity to adjust that bid. So once again, just our goal and what we believe the law should be protecting first and foremost is the delivery of public projects on time and on budget so that they can provide those services that they're intended to be used for. Second, we would just like to say that while it's been mentioned that this is a critical time, I would also point out that this bill has been introduced 9 times over the last 15 years. And so it's been a critical time at different points in the economy, and now is not unique from that. What we would say is that this bill has been vetoed 4 times by the last 3 governors. And to point out a few of their statements, one, Governor Wilson said it would be irresponsible to remove public agencies' flexibility to establish a reasonable retention limit on public works projects. Governor Wilson said the private sector is free to establish its own level of retention in an open marketplace where building owners, contractors, and subcontractors freely enter into construction contracts, which often include a 10% retention level. Here before me is a bill which would arbitrarily restrict public agencies to retention rates at half the private sector standard. We agree with Mr. Wilson and with Mr. Davis in that regard. Lastly, just to focus on the question of the bonding that was brought up as a viable alternative, we think that bonding is important, but is not a viable sole alternative to a 10% retention. We believe that they work in tandem. In fact, to go out to bonding on a project will delay that project by months. And sometimes the surety will actually fight trying to pay on that bond, and it becomes a very difficult and transigent process that can cost taxpayers lots of money, delay projects so that schools, firehouses, water plants are not delivered at the time that they are needed. Furthermore, once they do pay up, they choose who will do the project from that point forward. So we now lose, as a public agency, the ability to choose who our contractor is working on our public projects. We think that while it's one alternative, it's not the best alternative. We think they're both needed. Thank you.
Thank you. Others in opposition?
Dave Walrath, representing Small School Districts Association. Understanding the concern that was referenced on profit margin, the 10% retention can go into an escrow account and earn interest. So there is not the same type of thing where the profit margin is automatically reduced because there is a retention provision. There's also times when it drops back down upon completion of work, a variety of other actions going on. Small districts usually have small projects. 10% of a small project isn't a lot of money. Naturally, 5% is even less. We share the similar concerns raised by the Special District Association on what happens when you have to access that bonding and surety in order to complete a project, particularly in a rural part of California. We are opposed.
Thank you.
Juliana Vorse with the Urban Counties Caucus. We're also opposed to the 5% retention requirement. In an era of realignment, when counties are being asked to do more and you hear about flexibility, this would reduce our flexibility, and therefore we're opposed to the bill. Thank you.
Thank you.
Amber Wiley with the Association of California Healthcare Districts, also opposed to the 5% retention provisions.
Brian Rivas on behalf of the California School Boards Association. We're opposed to the 5% or the cap on the 5% retention for the reasons previously stated.
Thank you.
Jennifer Whiting with the League of California Cities, also opposed to the 5% retention proceeds provisions.
Mr. Chairman and members, Mike Dillon representing the California Association of Sanitation Agencies as well as County Sanitation Districts of Los Angeles, also opposed to the 5% provision.
Mr. Chair, members, Phil Vermeulen representing American Contractors Indemnity. We'd like to get there. We're close, but we believe that it should be a mandatory bond for the subcontractors. That way everybody's covered with the jobs going as cheap as they are now, and for the foreseeable future, we think this absolutely makes good sense and good public policy. With that amendment, we'd be in strong support of the measure. Thank you.
Wait, which makes good sense? That the reduction from 10 to 5 makes good sense?
We have no problem with the 5% if we mandate that all subcontractors must have the bond as well.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Chairman and members, Mark Connerly with the Roofing Contractors Association of California. We have moved from a strong opposition to a more moderate opposition on the bill. We think there's a lot good with the bill. We do still have some concerns, though, regarding the preliminary notice language, and if the author is open to continuing dialogue on clarifying that language, we would love to move to a support position, but at this time we're still into opposition.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Dr. Ronald Johnston. I represent the Union Roofing Contractors Association of Southern California. I would agree with my colleague, Mr. Connerly, regarding where we're at with this bill at this particular point in time. I would like to commend the author and his staff for working with us with the new amended language that addresses some of our concerns. However, we feel that there's a lack of clarity in some of the language dealing with the preliminary bond provisions, and if the author is willing to sit down with us to clarify very minor revisions, we're on the 10-yard line ready to move into the end zone in support of his bill. But at this particular point, we have to be in opposition.
Thank you. Others in opposition to the bill? Seeing none. All right, colleagues, your turn. Questions or comments for Senator Padilla? Mr. Dickinson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I apologize, Senator, for not hearing the entirety of the presentation. I like this bill with the exception of the retention issue, which does cause me concern. And so I just would like to explore this a little bit more, what the crucial nature of, and I've read the analysis, so I know the arguments that have been presented there, but what's the crucial nature, indispensable to this bill of retaining that, or having that provision that would allow no more than a 5% retention?
No, and I appreciate the question. Given the theme that we heard from the opposition, I was prepared to address it in my closing statement. But part of the context in previous conversations or hearings of this bill, the bulk of the attention was related to the Section 2 area of the bill. And through the amendments today, I think we have, for the most part, resolved that, leaving retention as the last point of sort of significant question or concern for the opposition. So let me just, I think, make the case. 5%, it's really a policy choice for the legislature. I don't think 5% is unreasonable. In fact, I think it's relatively balanced given all of our considerations. On the one hand, you do need to maintain some level of withholding to have that as leverage or accountability for contractors and subcontractors. In fact, that 5% threshold is what is currently in practice for a project at the UC system, as for projects through Caltrans. I believe we've added some flexibility to the language of the bill. If I can turn your attention to page 6, towards the bottom, we do write that projects may exceed 5% on specific projects where the director of the department has made a finding prior to the bid that the project is substantially complex and therefore requires a higher retention amount than 5%. So the ability is there under those specific circumstances. But in fairness to the folks that are going to be doing the work, both contractors, subcontractors, as well as the laborers here, that has to be predetermined. You can't just add it post-bid and post-award that all of a sudden we're going to change the rules from 5 to some other level. I think the 5% also addresses a couple of things. It's not so much that we're trying to address a profit margin issue. That's a concern from some. But there's a cash flow issue here. Given the state of the economy, given the state of the credit markets, we know that at the state and local level, there's a lot of infrastructure that we need done. There's a lot of projects that have been planned and approved and are ready to go, but for cash flow. So a 5% threshold, I think, is a proper balance between the accountability we need over contractors and subs with the ability to have the cash flow so the work can get going again. And as we put people back to work, that's part of our economic recovery. Finally, I want to say that part of the toolkits for local entities to make sure that they have the responsible contractors working on a job is a pre-qualification process. You're probably familiar with that with your time in local government. This doesn't change that at all. That ability and those tools are still there for school districts, for cities, for anybody else.
Yeah, and I appreciate that, and I think pre-qualification is often a very good approach to use, although I think most jurisdictions don't do it unless they think they have what we would all probably agree is a substantially complex project. What would constitute, though, a substantially complex project? Is it by amount of money? Is it the number of different trades? Is it the size of the structure? I mean, what would it be?
That's up to the awarding entity.
So that would just depend on each jurisdiction defining that?
Right. Local control.
Thank you, Mr. Dickinson.
Okay. Thank you.
Other questions or comments for the Senator? Seeing none, Senator Padilla, do you wish to close?
With that being said, just part of the context too, this was approved by the Senate on a unanimous bipartisan vote. I'd appreciate your aye vote here today.
Thank you. Is there a motion on the bill? Been moved. Second. Is there a second? It's been moved and seconded. Call the roll, please.
Fear.
Aye.
Fear, aye. Wagner. Aye. Wagner, aye. Adkins. Adkins, aye. Dickinson. Dickinson, aye. Gaines. Huber. Huffman. Jones. Monning. Wachowski. Wachowski, aye.
That bill has 5 votes, requires 1 more. It's beyond call. Senator, you have another bill, number 17, SB 859.
Yes, thank you again, Mr. Chair. Let me begin this presentation by accepting as author's amendments those technical amendments offered on the bottom of page 3 of the analysis and the top of page 4 in the analysis. The need for this bill, the inspiration for this bill, is the prediction, more than just a prediction, the plans by many for 1 million electric vehicles hitting the road in the state of California over the course of the next decade, and many more around the country. And while the mass deployment of electric vehicles into the marketplace have a lot of upsides, whether it's reducing our dependence on foreign oil, reducing emissions, and therefore improving our environment, etc., we need to be careful that they are smoothly integrated into the grid and that we protect ourselves from inadvertent adversarial impacts to both our transmission system as well as local distribution system. To do so, utilities need some specific information to properly assess and upgrade where necessary local distribution points of our electricity grid to accommodate the additional load presented by electric vehicles. This bill would permit utilities to access residents' address information specifically in DMV records and allow the utility to track the effective charging of these electric vehicles on the distribution grid. There's a notice requirement for vehicle owners that their address is being shared, and the information that's being shared is specifically contained to that address information only, not the name of the owner of the vehicle or anything else. And we're also writing into the bill that the utility can not use the address information for any other purpose. With that, let me introduce Eileen Tutt on behalf of the California Electric Transportation Association to speak in support of the bill.
Thank you. First witness in support. The bill's been moved.
Second.
And seconded, please.
Thank you. Eileen Tutt with the California Electric Transportation Coalition. I just want to point out that the automakers are also on board with this idea that the utilities do need to know where the vehicles will be charging, and most of the time, approximately 75% of the time, these vehicles will be charging in the home. So the automakers are also working with utilities to provide address level information for new vehicles sold. Unfortunately, that will not capture if a person sells their vehicle privately or if they move to a different address. So the DMV data is a critical component, and I urge your aye vote. Thank you.
Thank you. I do want to point out that that which is transmitted does not include the name of the individual, correct?
Does not
Simply
include the name.
fact that there's an electric vehicle at that address.
Right.
Please continue.
Russell Lowry with PG&E. We've spent thousands of hours planning how to smoothly integrate these vehicles into our system, and Senator Padilla, to his credit, has brought together the entire EV community to try and figure out this notification process. One of the slides that we've presented at one of the numerous hearings that the senators chaired is a circuit-by-circuit analysis we've done in particular parts of our service territory that show that one additional of certain kinds of EV chargers on a circuit can actually blow a transformer. And in certain areas, one transformer may be 5 or 6 houses. And the load from a quick charge station is equivalent to a small house. And so it's critical for everyone interested in a safe, reliable grid that we have the planning information that we need to.
Thank you very much. Next witness in support.
Heidi Barsuli on behalf of San Diego Gas and Electric. We do believe that the location information we're seeking is important for us to ensure the safe, reliable, and efficient integration into our distribution systems.
Thank you.
Alicia Priego with the California Municipal Utilities Association. We represent the publicly owned utilities throughout the state, and like our counterparts, the investor-owned utilities, we are in strong support and believe this information is necessary to maintain our grid.
Thank you.
And Rod Brewer on behalf of Southern California Edison. We'd like to thank Senator Padilla for his leadership on this issue, and we are here in strong support.
Thank you. Others in support of Mr. Padilla's measure? Witnesses in opposition to the bill? Seeing none, the bill's been moved and seconded. Colleagues, questions or comments for Senator Padilla? Seeing none, Senator, wish to close?
Ask for your aye vote.
Call the roll, please.
Fuhr?
Aye.
Fuhr, aye. Wagner? Aye. Wagner, aye. Adkins? Adkins, aye. Dickinson? Dickinson, aye. Gaines? Gaines, aye. Huber? Huffman? Jones? Monning? Wachowski? Aye. Wachowski, aye.
That bill has 6 votes and is out. Congratulations.
Thank you very much.
I'm yes.
All right. Now, Senator Woke is here. Senator Woke is here on one matter, item 10, SB 595. Senator, good morning. No, don't say that. Please. Bill's been moved and seconded. That's a hint, Senator Woke.
I accept the author's amendments, which I agreed to in Natural Resources to take here, and thank you for your aye vote.
Yeah, fair enough.
This is about abandoned vessels and setting up a new, a better administrative process by by the California State Lands Commission to get the abandoned boats out of the waterways that belong to the state. So this should make it a much more efficient and fair process. Take a look at the pictures. These boats are not lost. They are abandoned, and because it's cheaper than dismantling them.
And they're not misplaced.
And they're not
Thank you.
misplaced.
You have a witness in support of your bill.
Good morning. My name's Peter Pelkofer. I'm a senior counsel with the California State Lands Commission, sponsor the bill, and we request your support. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Very good. Colleagues, the bill's been moved and seconded. We have a visual aid. Are there questions or comments for Senator Woke? Seeing none. Senator, wish to close?
I vote.
Call the roll, please.
Fuhrer.
Aye.
Fuhrer, aye. Wagner. Aye. Wagner, aye. Adkins. Adkins, aye. Dickinson. Dickinson, aye. Gaines. Gaines, aye. Huber. Huffman. Jones. Monning. Monning, aye. Wachowski.
Congratulations. Your bill is out, Senator. Thank you very much. Senator Anderson is here on item number 19, SB 903. Senator, as you begin, I'm assuming that you'll accept as an author's amendment the contingent enactment language proposed in the legislation. Thank you. Please proceed.
Now you just took some of my speech. I was going to start off by accepting.
Oh, very well. Okay, please.
So thank you for that. Thank you, Mr. Chair, members. SB 903 is a follow-up to the California Public Divestment from Iran Act, which this legislature unanimously passed just 3 years ago. However, as you know, from the Oversight Committee, it's been a long time being enacted by the public pensions systems. With this bill, SB 903, we're adding sunshine to the divestment process to assist CalPERS and CalSTRS to fully implement the law. It's time for some transparency and accountability, and I ask for your aye vote. Today with me is Cliff Berg from the Jewish Public Affairs Committee and Pete Conde with AMVETS.
Good. Please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Cliff Berg here today on behalf of the Jewish Public Affairs Committee and ADL. We are in support of Senator Anderson's bill. Would like to thank him and the chair of this committee, Mr. Fuhrer, for taking leadership on this issue this year to keep public scrutiny and legislative oversight upon CalPERS and CalSTRS administration and implementation of AB 221, which this legislature passed unanimously to require CalPERS and CalSTRS to divest from those companies in their portfolios in the energy and defense sectors that have business operations in Iran. Unfortunately, it took CalPERS nearly 3.5 years to conclude that they would divest. For over 3 years, they kept telling the legislature that it would be a breach of their fiduciary duty to divest of those companies. This year, 3 days before a legislative oversight hearing scheduled by this House, which a number of you attended, they announced that they would divest. All Mr. Anderson's bill and Mr. Fuhrer's bills do is ensure that any future decision on fiduciary duty is done in public, and the public spotlight is shown upon that process, which in the past has been in secret with no discussion and public discussion. Would urge your support. This is an important issue. Today, Iran announced that it had missile silos, hardened missile silos with missiles that could reach U.S. bases and Israel. They continue their march toward military preparations and development of nuclear weapons. This legislation and Mr. Fuhrer's legislation is intended to use the economic power of the United States to ensure that they do not develop those nuclear weapons or use them. Urge your aye vote.
Thank you. Others in support?
Mr. Chairman, members, Pete Conate representing the American Veterans, the California State Commanders Veterans Council, the American Legion, the Military Officers Association of America, and we are in strong support of this bill. I'd like to thank you and Senator Anderson for bringing this issue forward. Our goal is to stop American military men and women having to fight in a war if we can prevent Iran from getting nuclear weapons and developing longer-range missiles. Thank you.
Thank you. Others in support? Other witnesses here in opposition?
I would just add that both on your bill and Mr. Anderson's bill, we have consistently heard from CalSTRS and CalPERS that somehow this legislation, by providing a public spotlight, will allow someone to get inside information ahead of the rest of the public on their investment policies. These bills have nothing to do with their investment policies. They deal with fiduciary duty in a public hearing. All the companies are already identified publicly in the annual report required by the legislature, are fully disclosed ahead of time. Everybody has a level playing field. Everybody knows what those companies are. And these bills are very narrow and very limited to determinations of fiduciary duty.
Thank you. Witnesses in opposition? Seeing none, the bill's been moved. Is there a second? Second. Bill's been moved and seconded. Questions or comments for Senator Anderson? I do want to point out, sometimes people question whether actions by the state of California can have the desired effect in contexts like this. I do want to point out that another piece of legislation, last year's 1650, which has to do with contracting practices, was just mentioned in a leading financial newspaper yesterday in an article saying that because California took the action we did on a related measure last year, that companies are changing their practices with regard to Iran. So we can make a difference here. And having said that, Mr. Anderson, do you wish to close?
I ask for an aye vote.
Call the roll, please.
Fear.
This is aye as amended. Aye.
Fear, aye. Wagner. Wagner, aye. Adkins. Adkins, aye. Dickinson. Dickinson, aye. Gaines. Gaines, aye. Huber. Huffman. Jones. Monning. Monning, aye. Wachowski.
That bill has sufficient votes and is out. Congratulations, Senator.
Thank you.
Now we have Senator DeSaulnier, who is here on two matters. Item number 3, SB 201, and a committee bill, item number 9, SB 563. Senator DeSaulnier, good morning.
Mr. Chairman, what a delight to see you.
Indeed, and you.
First off, SB 201.
Yes.
So SB 201, the Flexible Corporations Committee or bill, is the result of 18 months of some of the best corporate lawyers in California and the United States trying to create a new business form that would help with doing socially responsible, my words, sort of corporate governance. So what it allows is for corporations to choose with a very distinct process under the current guidance of corporate law to basically create a separate purpose other than the highest return on investment for shareholders. And in this regard, I think it's possible to change the corporate culture in the United States to a way that people are more conscious of being masters to more than just the return on investment. We have met with some of the nonprofits who have concerns. Personally, we believe that some of their concerns are not real, but we'll continue to have discussions with them. We've put a lot of work into it, obviously, and I'm waiting for my witnesses to appear. Hopefully they will appear by my side, so I'll stretch this out an appropriate period of time.
You need not.
We know that I've also talked to Mr. Huffman about his bill. We're working closely with him. We think his bill and the analysis goes to this, and I appreciate the comments of your committee consultants. We believe that the potential is to complement each other, that there are people who will avail themselves of both corporate forms if they're both signed by the governor. And we think this puts California in a wonderful place vis-a-vis actually attracting more venture capital, that venture capitalists who look at these kind of corporate forms with a long-term return on investment in our environment and social responsibility will be attracted to California and create more jobs. So with that, we've had bipartisan support. I'd be happy to try to answer any questions and would ask for your aye vote.
Thank you. And these bills are, I think, complementary rather than mutually exclusive. Witnesses in support? Witnesses in opposition to the bill?
Blood bank.
Good morning.
Good morning. Ken Larson. Is this mic on?
Yes.
Thanks. Okay. Ken Larson with California Association of Nonprofits. We very much appreciate the intent of this bill, but we have advocated since the beginning of the process this year and actually last year with the prior version of this bill that this needs more public vetting. It needs an informational hearing. It's a major change in social policy to begin to transfer responsibility in statute in any form to the private sector for public purpose activities that have been carried on by government and nonprofits. There's a long history of nonprofits and for-profits working together at arm's length to keep the profit motive and the public purpose motive properly separated. Our organization is an example of that. For 30 years, we've had a wholly owned insurance service that provides reasonable cost insurance to nonprofits and we've operated our statewide association, I think, with great integrity. We don't find current law the barrier to formation of these types of organizations and relationships that some of the investors that and some of the attorneys that have worked in advancement of the Senator's bill claim. We're concerned about a couple of things. One is, and we thank your committee for the analysis, because it's, I think, the beginning of the kind of discussion we should have started a year ago, where we really kind of compare points of view and come up with some reasonable solutions. Excuse me.
You could sort of zero in on your critique of the bill, because
the critique of the bill is that there's a lack of the oversight and accountability provisions that exist under current law for nonprofits. The state attorney generals and the National Association of Charity Officials consider this of sufficient significance that they're convening a session at their meeting in October on this subject. Second, we do think that there is very nuanced possibilities and likelihood of competition for existing resources. Our statements and the Senator's statements probably oversimplify it a little bit and talk simply about charitable donations, but nonprofits and for-profits compete in other ways in the credit market. There's also subtle ways. If an individual investor is looking at a pooled fund, they may decide to go with the for-profit version of public purpose rather than the nonprofit one through a charitable donation.
Thank you. Okay. Others in opposition?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Kathy Lynch, representing the California Society of Association Executives, which is the home of professional and trade associations in California. We, too, are opposed to this legislation. We think that the current corporate structure is sufficient. We think that there are actually things in the bill that can be harmful to the current construction of associations. We believe that any new corporate structure in an era where we're looking at Bell City and all the other types of oversight and the things that we've been through on Wall Street, that we shouldn't be entertaining corporate structures that don't have third-party oversight. We can certainly talk about real and perceived potential problems, but I think it's fair to say that nonprofits are stretched very thin at the current time, and that any kind of resource drain from them is going to be detrimental. One of the things, again, not really opposed to the concepts that the good senator is putting forward, but I think there are always these unintended consequences. And one of the things that can happen is that with all the buckets in the nonprofit sector, the social services side and those types of equations, money will be drained from those, and they will go into some of the areas where you can attract venture capital dollars. So we're looking for the legislature to try to balance that so we don't find ourselves, especially with the budget crisis the way it is, and the nonprofit sector being the safety net, particularly in the social service arena, where we see a drain of those resources. And I know that the good senator will say that that's just a perception and that's not a fact, but I think that that's why we need some oversight hearing to get these other entities from the nonprofit sector at the table so they can express their current situation and the concerns that they have. Thank you.
Others in opposition? Seeing none, questions or comments for the senator on this bill? Mr. Dickinson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senator, there's an issue that's been raised regarding the potential exposure of shareholders to not have their interests adequately or appropriately considered. And those who raise this point point to Section 2700 A and contrast it with 2700C, which is on page 34 of the bill, and in particular in 2700C, the contention is by allowing directors to give whatever weight they choose to different factors that may or may not be relevant, the interests of shareholders could, I assume the argument is, conceivably get no weight whatsoever, and other interests would be elevated over those of shareholders entirely. Can you discuss that issue a little bit?
Yeah, I think, and the working group took a lot of time, both with me and in their discussions, have a balance here. So it's important to remember that this is under the current corporate forms in terms of transparency and accountability that some of the opponents just talked about. I think it goes to the same issue, although this is a little different. This is, as I understand your question, goes to the concerns about potential greenwashing, that you would actually use, perhaps, or corporation would try to be masters of both. It's a balance here. And in terms of the accountability, there's still causes of action from all due respect to attorneys. If they don't follow the form and don't do the report as required in the bill to their shareholders, that the corporate officers would be held accountable through the current actions that are available to anybody who has standing. So this is the balance that I think the group, and I agree with them, has tried to strike. There is a tension there, and there will be people who try to circumvent the intention and the legislative intention here. I think we can predict that, and hopefully we will have to referee that as it comes about. But the beauty to this bill is it's keeping the current structure and allowing for a separate form.
And so it's not your intention to leave shareholders without the remedies that they would otherwise have available?
They have the remedies. The law says that that the corporate officers have to do an annual report to the shareholders in terms of how they're meeting their goals on the flexible purpose, as well as maintaining and pursuing the greatest return on investment. So there is a tension there, but I think it's natural and it's in the current structure of governance for corporations, and I think that's what the working group tried to do with their expertise.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Dickinson. Other questions or comments for Senator Sonia?
Mr. Chairman, I do have a witness who's come a long way, and if you could just give him 30 seconds, I would appreciate it.
Of course.
And support.
Sir.
Go ahead, Chris.
Okay. Thank you. My name is Chris Erickson. I guess I'd call myself a serial entrepreneur since 1992. I've built a number of companies, took one public. Prior to that, I was a more classic Fortune 500 executive. Currently, I run a company called Climate Earth. We're a startup in San Francisco. It's my first sort of clean tech venture. We help large organizations in California and around the country, such as PG&E and Del Monte Foods and Webcore Builders, measure, manage, and reduce their environmental impacts. I support SB 201 for a number of reasons. First of all, I think it's going to accelerate our company's growth and allow us I think our purposeful charter will encourage new customers. I think it's going to be really important to attracting new talent. I've been visiting business schools and come from one, and the best and the brightest want to work for this kind of new company. I think it's going to attract other companies to California and help build a clean and maybe broader economy here in California, attract new organizations. I think the purposeful charter is really a powerful business tool as well, because in our case it's going to help focus our company's attention on our actual outcomes we want to produce for customers. It fits right into the corporate law, which makes me comfortable with it. And last of all, I think and this is more personal, I think it could play a very, very significant role in what I call restoring the corporation to a better place of respect. So for those reasons, I think this is a really important bill. It's a milestone for California. I'd really like to see it passed, and many of my colleagues in business would as well.
Thank you very much. Any further questions or comments on this measure from members of the committee? Seeing none, the bill has been moved and seconded. Has it not? No, there's no motion yet?
I'll move.
Mr. Wachowski is going to do so. Is there a second? There's a second. Senator Sony, do you wish to close?
I appreciate your time, and I would respectfully ask for your aye vote. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Call the roll, please.
Fear.
Aye.
Fear, aye. Wagner. Wagner, no. Atkins. Atkins, aye. Dickinson. Dickinson, aye. Gaines. No. Gaines, no. Huber. Huffman. Jones. Monning. Aye. Monning, aye. Wachowski. Wachowski.
Bill has 5 votes, requires 1 more, and is on call. Senator, you also have number 9, SB 563. Please proceed.
First of all, Mr. Chairman, thank you, and let me say that I'm more than happy to accept the amendments suggested in the analysis to clarify that board member consent to hold an emergency meeting via email may be sent electronically. This bill is an endeavor by our staff at Senate Trans and Housing to deal with numerous complaints in a world with electronic meetings and for common interest development where they've got a lot of pressure because of the financial market with short sales and foreclosures, that we try to clarify how they have their meetings, and basically does it in two ways. It closes a loophole that allows common interest developments to hold board meetings via email without participation of members, so we close that. Although it does explicitly more clearly define, or does clearly define, when you can have an emergency meeting using email. It also clarifies that association must notify members of an executive session. This is meant entirely in the spirit of trying to make it clearer when common interest developments hold meetings for both the people, the management, and for members of the development. We've also expanded to try to make sure that appropriate administrative functions are allowed to happen without a member of the board of directors. And with that,
I'll move the matter.
A witness.
The bill's been moved and seconded. Your first witness, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members. Carrie Mazzoni for the Executive Council of Homeowners, an organization of common interest developments and homeowners associations, primarily in Northern California. We are in support of the bill. We work closely with the committee staff on developing some of the components of the bill. We believe that this provides protection and greater transparency for individual members of CIDs as well as the associations at large.
Thank you very much.
Let me just mention that Ms. Mazzoni is a former member of the Women's Caucus of the Legislature, so she might have inadvertently said Madam Chair at the beginning of her comments.
Did I?
For what it's worth, as long as it's said nicely, I really don't care. Any other witnesses?
Sitting up in your spot there.
That's sort of a broad definition, Chairman.
So sorry, my apologies.
That's okay.
It was not even noticed until the senator called my attention to it. All right. Are there other witnesses in support of Mr. DeSaulnier's measure? Any opposition? Seeing none, pretty straightforward bill. It's been moved and seconded. Questions? Oh, there is opposition. Well,
sort of like a Fuhrer bill. What would a DeSaulnier bill be without opposition?
Indeed. Please.
Just for the record, Skip Dahm on behalf of the Community Associations Institute of California and representing the homeowners associations. I understand that this bill has an apparent inherent appeal. It does. However, to be honest with you, I really haven't seen any documentation of the need for it or the number of times at which or during which an association has gone off on its own and done some irreparable harm to the members. And they have a fiduciary duty to the members. So I imagine they're not going to, go off the reservation, so to speak, and do things too frequently. So if that documentation could be provided, that'd be helpful. We also see that there probably is no real enforcement mechanism in this bill. I don't know what type you might envision, but it would, in our opinion, lead to unintended consequences, such as how specifically should any item of business in a bill be delegated to someone else, be it a manager, a volunteer, another board member, or a committee? Do we have to have a laundry list of all matters that this volunteer or this delegatee would have to have authority over in order to act on its own? And you might get to the point where they had essentially either explicit, excessive authority or not enough authority, and then they mistakenly made judgment calls on their own, thinking they were doing the right thing, but actually created a problem. So we see that as a solution in search of a problem. And until the problem is identified, documented, we can't support the measure in its current form. Okay. But I do want to say that the Senator is well aware of our position on this and has been since the beginning.
Thank you for your testimony. Yeah. Senator DeSaulnier, wish to close?
Respectfully ask for your aye vote.
Thank you. Call the roll.
Fuhrer.
Aye.
Fuhrer, aye. Wagner.
Aye.
Wagner, aye. Adkins. Adkins, aye. Dickinson. Dickinson, aye. Gaines. Gaines, aye. Huber. Huffman. Jones. Monning.
Aye.
Monning, aye. Wachowski.
Thank you. That bill is out. Congratulations.
Thank you, colleagues. Madam Chair.
Indeed. An authentic member of the Women's Caucus is next, Senator Evans, who is here on two items. Item number 2, SB 163, and item number 7, SB 474.
We have amendments on handing out that are noted in the analysis.
Okay. And colleagues, amendments are being distributed that are noted in the analysis on SB 163. Senator Evans, good morning.
Respectfully, Mr. Chairman, perhaps they thought they were in Senate Judiciary Committee.
Perhaps.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm pleased to present the annual bar dues bill, with which, and we have worked very hard with your committee consultants and with you on this bill. It authorizes the State Bar to collect the membership dues for 2012, and I'm happy to accept the amendments in the analysis, which are being handed out now. The amendments will help provide much-needed funds for legal aid programs, which have been threatened in recent years by the decline in revenue. I'm happy that the partnership has been formed between the bar and the legislature to carry out this very important provision for low-income legal services. And particularly, I want to thank you, Mr. Chair, for having made that recommendation. I think it's a wonderful thing for us to be able to do. This bill represents a compromise proposal that reflects the reports that have come out of the State Bar's Governance in the Public Interest Task Force. It is a compromise. There was a majority proposal and a minority proposal. But what we are doing in this bill, in addition to helping provide legal services for low-income Californians, is to change the makeup and composition and the size of the bar's governing board, and to make the public interest the most important part of that board's charge. So we have changed the makeup of the board. We've increased diversity. We've ensured the ratio of professional to public members of the governing board is more reasonable, and that it is in fact operating in for the public protection. And I want to thank everybody that worked so hard on the task force. I know that it was a very lengthy process and it was a labor of love. And thank the committee and the committee chair for your work on this bill. Former Senator Joe Dunn, who is now the executive director of the State Bar, is here to testify.
Thank you. Senator Dunn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, fellow members, staff as well. And I do want to initially give great thanks, of course, to our author, Senator Evans. It's been great to work with her office throughout this process. I do have some brief comments, Mr. Chair and fellow members, but before I get that, as a matter of professional courtesy, I do want to note that the one listed opposition, the Sacramento Bar Association, was here and represented by their president, Mike Levy. Unfortunately, he had to go. This is not reflective of the bar. I did say as a professional courtesy I would note that he was here and that he particularly wanted the committee to take note of their opposition letter with respect to the separation of powers comments. I have done my professional duty to Mr. Levy and the as president of the Sacramento Bar. On to my very brief three comments with respect to SB 163. The SB 163, of course, as you know, really has three major components to it, and I want to very briefly address all three of them so the committee is aware of exactly where the bar sits in these ongoing discussions, and I appreciate your indulgence for just a moment, Mr. Chair. The first, of course, is what started it all, is our annual dues bill at $410, and I'd like to note, of course, as reflected in the analysis, that the Board Operations Committee, that analysis points out, is the body that acts in between our board meetings. They unanimously embraced what was discussed in partnership between the bar and the legislative representatives, including the chair and his staff, that will include a $10 rebate to the members for 2012. That was a unanimous vote of the Board Operations Committee, in essence representing the full board itself. The second issue, of course, are the governance reform language that have been in discussion, as you know, for some time, certainly through our task force and then through the language as currently in 163. I just briefly want to address this just to make sure for clarifications, Mr. Chair, more than anything else. The board, the full board of the bar for the members did in fact vote on a resolution relating to the governance reform language currently in 163. That was a resolution that was adopted by our board about a week and a half ago. It did adopt a support position, although it referenced 7 items that were instructed to myself as the executive director and our lobbyist, Jennifer Wada, to engage in discussions with the key legislative representative. I won't go through all 7 of them that were part of our resolution, but there are some who unfortunately read the analysis as suggesting that those discussions are over. I just want to clarify they're not. Those discussions continue. In all honesty, we know on some of the 7 we've been told no, there will be no amendments of that type. Some we have agreed on. One is reflected in the Senate analysis, in the Assembly analysis, the conflict of interest provisions, and there are some that are still in discussions with no commitments either way. So I just wanted to make sure on the governance reform language that there was no one could read into anything within the analysis that, as someone put it to me, that Joe Dunn and Jennifer capitulated on all of the discussions. Those are still in discussion. We look forward to those ongoing discussions and assuming we go to the floor through that process, Mr. Chair. The final thing is on the legal services components, which Senator Evans already referenced. The board, I will tell you, is extremely proud to embrace the discussions and the agreement that were reached between the bar leadership and the various offices represented here today, the senators, the chairs, staff involved, other offices as well, which, as the analysis points out, I won't go into detail, of course, we increased the $10 diversion, as we call it at the bar, to $20 for 2012-2013, and make a voluntary additional $2 million contribution, not out of mandatory dues. So if anybody has that concern, I want to make sure that was never part of the discussions, that will make those both in 2012 and 2013. There's one caveat for 2013 with those dollars that is reflected in the draft language. It's not referenced in the analysis, but it is in the draft language. With respect to that draft language, I just want to make sure that the committee knows we received it today as well. First blush, it looks fine. Obviously, I have to give it to our Office of General Counsel to do what lawyers do, of course, and analyze it for any unseen problems with the language. But first blush, it appears to accurately reflect our agreements. The only other thing that I want to point out, Mr. Chair, is, and I have a suggestion how going forward with respect to the analysis, because I know sometimes things in committee will roll to the floor analysis as well, is that with respect to the chart on page, I think it's page 9, is perhaps, as I suggest, adding one more footnote to it that reflects certain assumptions that are not in those numbers that we did provide to the committee. And I know that the committee is well aware of those things like inflationary costs, labor costs over the next 5 years, deferred maintenance issues, because I just want to point out that our internal budget process have different numbers. It basically reaches the same conclusion, but we take a different approach to those. We build in those assumptions. And so I'd only ask, and I think I'm not sure there's any opposition, that those footnotes that fall below the chart on page 9, perhaps we can just add one more footnote that certain assumptions are not contained in those numbers.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Others in support?
My name is Stephanie Burry. I represent SEIU Local 1000, who represents the employees at the State Bar, both the employees in San Francisco and Los Angeles. And we are definitely in support of the governance part of the bar bill. We definitely support the part regarding the majority of the bar being the board being appointed. We think that's a definite improvement in the way the bar works, and we look forward to that. We wish there was a way to make it happen sooner than later, but we do understand the reality of that. We do have concerns about the fee portion of it, and it's not specific to the amount of the fee or even the number. It's the fact that the fee continues to be a leverage point between the legislature and the Board of Governors and the management at the bar, and that leaves the employees in the middle continually. We are currently in negotiations on a contract, and we continue to be held hostage by the bar bill every year. The employees are continually told there isn't enough money to do even basic merit adjustments every year because they're told, oh, well, the legislature hasn't approved the bar bill. And so the employees get sort of manipulated between the perception of what the management sees is happening in the legislature and what they're told. And we know that the numbers in this analysis we're very interested in the numbers that are in this analysis, and we appreciate that there's a long-term set of numbers here that we can look at and we can take back to ourselves. But we're also being told, too, that this does not include labor costs for the future. And so that makes it interesting to us, but it also leaves us in this place where we're also being manipulated and being told that we again are, we're only going to get the information that we can get, and we're again being manipulated, and that the legislature's holding the purse strings for the state bar, and they're the ones who are going to be telling the state bar how much money they have. And so we again continue just to be a little frustrated, and we don't blame the legislature or the Board of Governors, but we just continue to be concerned that we hope everybody just understands that when you talk about the state bar, you're also thinking about the employees who work there and how much that they take home to take care of their families every day. So
thank you for your testimony.
Thanks.
Others in support? Are there witnesses in opposition? Seeing none, colleagues, is there a motion on the bill? Been moved. Is there a second? Second. Mr. Dickens.
I have a question for either the author or Mr. Dunn, and it does follow on the Sacramento County Bar's opposition. I appreciate you mentioning that, Mr. Dunn. And it's the one step further. Their principal objection is what they see as an intrusion on separation of powers, and their letter notes that by their calculation, 25% of the members of the Board of Governors are currently appointed or come from outside the judicial branch and system in some way or another, and that would go with this realignment to 42%, 8 out of 19, I think, is my math on that. And I too made a promise to the president of the Bar Association to ask you to elaborate on this issue and why this ought not to be of greater concern to us.
Your thoughts? Yeah, I'll address that. This was of concern to me as well, and it's interesting being, as many of us are, both officers of the court and legislators, and the separation of powers is often forefront in my mind when I look at something like this. The fact is that there's always somewhat overlap, but I made sure that the legislative appointees were less in number and did not constitute a majority of the board. The reason, in my mind, anyway, in my reasoning, for the appointments by the legislature and the governor are for the public protection. And it's not that lawyers and the court judicial system can't also protect the public. In fact, that is their primary purpose. But this opens it up a little bit more to more scrutiny, more public participation, and a little bit more transparency. But it in no way would infringe upon the ability of the Bar Association to regulate itself, in my opinion. And I think reasonable minds could differ, but I tried to make sure that we were not intruding any further than I felt was important for the protection of the public. And Mr. Dunn may have other thoughts, but that was my reasoning.
I keep forgetting. I think the author, Senator Evans, has touched upon that. It is a very sensitive issue. I think this committee is well aware, probably better than anyone. We, as the State Bar, are a regulatory body within the judicial branch, and so there is that constant and ongoing concern. It was raised quite regularly throughout the public comments, public hearings with respect to the task force itself by a variety of entities, including the Sacramento Bar Association.
And I actually take this as two separate issues. One is who the appointing authority is, and the other is where the appointees are drawn from. And as you know, most of our professional regulatory boards and bureaus now have a majority of public members throughout state government. I embrace that. I think that is a change that was wise to make when it was implemented starting 30 years or more ago in the 70s and the 80s. I think the separation of powers issue is a little different question, an interesting one, and I think one that all of us should take a little bit more seriously as we continue to insert the legislature into appointing people for the executive or judicial branch functions.
Yes, thank you, Mr. If I may, Mr. Chair, just one additional comment. Although not specified in one of the 7 caveats within the board resolution supporting 163 from a week and a half ago, it doesn't reference separation of powers, but clearly buried within some of those items on the list of 7 are very serious concerns about separation of power from our majority on our board, and they have been part of our discussions since the resolution was passed by our board, and I expect those concerns will continue in the discussions that I referenced earlier, Mr. Dixon.
And I'm assuming if you haven't already, you'll continue to be in communication with the Sacramento County Bar to have this ongoing conversation about the state bar's concern on this issue.
No question about that. As you know from your personal experience here in Sacramento, Mr. Dickinson, they are a very active bar association and make sure that their voice has been heard, and they've been a regular participant throughout our task force process.
Ms. Atkins. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I would just echo Mr. Dickinson's comments because San Diego also registered a letter in opposition, and I would hope you would keep that in mind as well.
No question about it.
Yep. Thank you. Other questions or comments for Senator Evans? Seeing none, the bill's been moved and seconded. Ms. Evans, wish to close?
Ask for an aye vote.
Aye vote on the bill as amended. Call the roll, please.
Fear.
Aye.
Fear, aye. Wagner.
Aye.
Wagner, aye. Atkins. Atkins, aye. Dickinson. Dickinson, aye. Gaines. Gaines, aye. Huber. Huffman. Jones. Monning. Monning, aye. Wykowski.
That bill has sufficient votes and is out. Thank you very much. And now we have your other measure, which is item number 7, SB 474.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would like to start out by noting that there are authors' amendments, and they have been discussed in the committee analysis. So this bill continues the legislature's attempt to bring fairness to the construction area. You may recall many of us were here when we passed similar legislation dealing with the residential construction contractual indemnity issues, and this bill addresses the same issues in the commercial construction area. The bill ensures a proportional responsibility for a contractor's actions. If the contractor or the subcontractor is responsible or at fault for the damage, then that is the person to whom the law turns to make the plaintiff whole. As it is now, the subcontractors are being asked to take on all of the liability of a given construction project, and it's causing havoc within the industry. It's driving up costs, and in this very difficult economic times, it's making it more and more difficult to win project contracts, and it is basically expanding litigation, because when something goes wrong on one of these construction projects, everybody gets sued. The subcontractors get sued. They sue each other. The general contractor gets sued. The general contractor sues the subcontractors. And even as importantly, tenders the defense of the general contractor to the subcontractors. So this bill addresses that and tries to bring inherent fairness back to commercial construction projects. There are a number of witnesses here who will testify specifically about what the bill does. I do want to note, however, that we have taken amendments that have either removed addressed the concerns of the public entities, and now the public entities have either gone neutral or are in support of the bill. So I'll ask for an aye vote and turn it over to the witness.
Thank you, Senator. Your first witness in support, please.
Mr. Chairman, members, George Miller on behalf of the Crane Operators Association, who has been on the receiving end of a lot of suits and claims, in fact, of paying out for others, and in several instances in which our members weren't at fault. In any event, I think it's important to note, as the author noted, that we've worked with a lot of the stakeholders in this throughout the last couple of months to try and alleviate as many concerns as possible. We've worked with the public agencies. The author made a commitment to them that they would be, at a minimum, no worse than they were before this year started. We worked with the owners. A lot of senators raised issues about the owners and about sort of the, for lack of a better term, the passive owner, the dentist in town who sees 2 acres and thinks that would be a great site for a mini mall or a drugstore, what have you, and he goes out and contracts with the licensed architect to draw up plans, and then goes and contracts with the general contractor. But day to day, he's filling cavities, and whether that person should in fact be on the hook for actions that actually take place if he's not overseeing it day to day. So I think we've worked with we've worked with as many stakeholders as we can. We continue to do so, and I think what you have before you goes a long way in terms of the equitable distribution of fault, so that everybody on the job site, generals, subs, what have you, everybody's got skin in the game, and they're responsible for their own actions.
Thank you. Others in support?
Mr. Chairman, members, Eddie Bernanke on behalf of the National Electrical Contractors Association and the California Legislative Conference of the Plumbing, Heating, and Piping Industry. With the amendments taken today, the bill really clarifies 3 things for us. The bill provides that there's going to be a simple level of fairness that for all parties who are doing work on a construction project that they're responsible for their own actions. The bill limits the impact on the owners, as we pledged that we would try to do. And finally, the bill provides now for the general contractors with a subcontractor's duty to defend first dollar defense clause, in which the general contractors will not, under the new provisions on this bill, have to chase down the subcontractors to recoup funds once negligence is determined. The bill now has a requirement based on your scope of work for subcontractors to step up in the beginning of a claim, provide a defense, and then those who are found to be not negligent in the action are reimbursed for for performing in the action or defending the action. So we've really addressed that issue for the general contractors as well. So with that, I have Bill Last with us, who's our counsel of Last and Farrow, to address the bill in a little more detail and provide you guys answers to any questions you may have.
Thank you. Next witness in support.
Yes, my name is Bill Last. I'm a construction law attorney. I've been practicing for 32 years. I want to say over the 32 years I've been practicing, I've noted that the indemnity clauses are becoming more and more difficult to change. They're shifting more and more risk to the subcontractors, to the point that a sub could be responsible for 1 or 2% of the cause of whatever the fault of the harm is, yet it has to pay 100% of the defense costs and 100% of the indemnity dollars to pay to recover this. A recent appellate court decision called the Crawford case makes it clear that the subcontractor has to come in and defend, cannot escape that defense. So in the current environment, it is more likely that the recommendation I'm going to give to a subcontractor is to pay a claim, which you could be at 1% at fault for, because you want to avoid the attorney's fees associated with that. It's a risk that's been unsurely shifted over to the subs, which I believe this legislation should correct. I've been told that there's an issue dealing with active negligence in context of utilizing a design professional's plan. I'm familiar with what that issue is, and I want to say that there are 3 California Supreme Court cases, which also there's a U.S. Supreme Court case dealing with the implied warranty that plans and specifications that are given by an owner are complete. And in the event that it turns out that those plans and specifications are not complete, then the public owner is responsible for paying the additional costs associated with correcting that. There's a similar type of California Supreme Court case dealing with private owners as well. Once again, I want to say that from my experience and reading the bills, I believe that this legislation will correct some of the unfair risk being shifted to subcontractors.
Thank you. Others in support?
Mr. Chairman and members, Scott Wetch on behalf of the California State Pipe Trades Council, the State Association of Electrical Workers, the California Coalition of Utility Employees, the Western States Council of Sheet Metal Workers, and the Elevator Constructors Union. This, despite the fact that it's not a wage and hour bill, it's not a prevailing wage bill, is our #1 legislative priority this year because, for this very reason, the mechanical subcontractors and electrical contractors for which my members work almost exclusively tend to be the most substantial subcontractors on a job. And they also tend to be contractors who have been around for a long time, oftentimes generations, and they have deep pockets. So what has occurred is, as this evolution has progressed in regards to this Type 1 indemnity clauses, is now that we find ourselves in this horrible recession, we have 50% unemployment, and many of our contractors simply cannot expose themselves to the risk. And they are avoiding and scrutinizing projects like they never have before. And many of our biggest contractors will just walk away from bidding. And we're begging them to bid projects. And it comes back to this risk and this exposure that they're not willing to take on. And it's costing us jobs in a real world scenario. And that's why this is such an important piece of legislation. And we'd urge your aye vote.
Thank you. Others in support?
Mr. Chair, members, Cesar Diaz on behalf of the State Building and Construction Trades Council. Just to echo Mr. Wetch's comments also, what happens also as a result of that type of scenario is that the general contractor, then gets to select substandard subcontractors. So our members are not working because they're signatory to these subs. The general contractor then just basically says, I don't have the responsibility to choose the quality contractor for this particular, because I'm identifying myself from that responsibility. For those reasons, we urge your support. Thank you.
Thank you. I want to point out, as others continue to testify, the hour is late, and I don't want to cut anybody off, but I'd urge you not to be redundant in your testimony, please.
Thank you. Eric Bakke with Los Angeles Unified School District. So I think my position is slightly different than the previous speakers. I just first want to thank Senator Evans and staff and the committee here working with us. I think we've gotten the bill to a point where we haven't changed the pendulum, so to speak, from left to right. I think we've still maintained a fairly balanced approach to this issue, though very complex. I just want to also share that LAUSD has moved from a position of opposition because of the efforts of Senator Evans and her staff to actually a support position. And our position on support is based on the proposed amendments adding Section 3 of 2782B. This has been an issue for our district for a while, because many times we're named specifically only for the fact that we hired the design professional. The only way we can defend that situation is to sue our design professional to show that the plans and specifications were not defective. We feel that this actual language will actually eliminate that language, but it should be pointed out that this language does not eliminate the need or the right of a general contractor or subcontractor to bring a claim for defective plans. It simply can't be brought if we simply hire the design professional. I think that's a very simple distinction.
Thank you. Others in support?
Mr. Chair, members committee, Chris Walker on behalf of the California Association of Sheet Metal Air Conditioning Contractors. In the interest of brevity, we support the bill.
Thank you. Others in support of the bill?
Skip Dahm on behalf of the American Subcontractors Association of California, union and non-union companies. Greatest bill of the year. Thank you.
Dr. Ronald Johnston, Executive Director of the Union Roofing Contractors Association of Southern California. My membership is comprised of union-affiliated large roofing contractors, and we strongly urge a yea vote on SB 474. Thank you.
Mark Connerly on behalf of the Roofing Contractors Association of California, and we strongly urge your aye vote. Thank you.
Jack Molodanoff on behalf of the Construction Industry Legislative Council, support of the bill. Thank you.
Brett Barrow with the California Landscape and Irrigation Council. We're in strong support of the bill. Thank you.
Caitlin Vega for the California Labor Federation, also here in support.
Brad Deedy with the California Professional Association of Specialty Contractors, called CalPASC, representing both non-union and union specialty contractors across the state of California, in support. Thank you.
Dave Walrath, representing Small School Districts Association and the Coalition for Adequate School Housing. Similar to Los Angeles, we have moved from an opposed position to a support position as Small School Districts Association because of the author's proposed amendments. Coalition for Adequate School Housing has moved to a neutral position and is working to see if we can get to a support position. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, Todd Bloomstein on behalf of the Southern California Contractors Association, in support.
Good afternoon. Phil Vermeulen representing the engineering contractors, fence contractors, Flasher Barricade, and Marin Builders Association, in support. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman and members, Bruce Mignani with the Houston Group.
representing the California concrete contractors and the California precast concrete contractors in support of the bill. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, Kyle Packham with the California Special Districts Association. We have removed our opposition and would like to thank the Senator, the Chair, and the staff. Thank you very much.
Amber Wiley with the Association of California Healthcare Districts, also removing our opposition with the latest amendments. Thank you.
Jennifer Whiting with the League of California Cities. I want to thank the Senator, her staff, and the committee staff here for all the work they've put into this bill. We have also moved from a position of opposition to neutral, and we're also taking a longer look at the proposed amendments to see if we can go to support. Thank you.
Other witnesses in support of the bill? Witnesses in opposition to the bill?
Mr. Chair and members, Scott Governor here on behalf of the Construction Employers Association. We are primarily general contractors. The discussion centered on the unfair treatment between subcontractors and general contractors. While we may disagree in the facts, we are open to discussing that. We have provided amendments to speak to some of those issues. The problem is this bill contains two distinctly different components now. And when the public agencies got up here and removed their opposition or went in support, it's because of the amendment that went in on Friday. And on page 5 of the bill, what it now requires or provides is that owners, public and private, may not require a contractor or subcontractor to indemnify them for active negligence. Then it goes on to define active negligence to be anything associated with a design. So what that does inversely is provide that they can require a contractor to indemnify them for the architect they hire. California law, Public Contract Code, I think 1108, provides that, and as the proponent suggested, that public agencies may not hold contractors liable for plans and specifications. It's a long-standing U.S. Supreme Court ruling, several California Supreme Court rulings, and then again California law, which had one no vote when it went through. The language as amended and the language the public agencies like, it's just that reason. It allows them to shift the liability for the architects they hire onto the contractor. That's patently unfair. The legislature has spoken to that. That is not an acceptable position for our association or our members to be in. They don't hire the architects. They have no ability to tell the architects what to do. Yet this bill allows them to shift that responsibility. Mr. Diaz pointed out in his testimony that contractors are free through the indemnity provisions to hire whoever they want, whatever flaky subcontractor they want, and have no responsibility. This provision does the exact same thing for project owners. It allows them to spend as little as they want or can on an architect, knowing they can pass the indemnification on to the contractor. It's patently unfair, and while we can discuss the other provisions in the bill, we would request that this language, the qualifiers for active, be removed. As it relates to the other provisions in the bill, I think a recurring issue for us has to do with the insurance coverage. Under practice today, when there is a claim, the contractor will tender that claim to the subcontractor, who will then give that to their insurer under the additional insured endorsement. The insurer, without fail, says, I'm not going to provide a defense in violation of the Presley Holmes decision until there's litigation. The Senator has said repeatedly her goal is to limit litigation. We provided amendments to say the insurers should have the same liability as subcontractors, certainly under an AI endorsement. If there are penalties for subcontractors for not responding to claims and penalties for contractors for filing egregious claims, those same penalties should exist for insurers, because all we're accomplishing with this is we're letting the insurers off the hook. The additional insured endorsement is intended to give the contractor the same coverage as the subcontractor, and the insurers simply are not showing up. We need to compel them to show up. That way, a lot of the problems raised by the folks in this room would be mitigated if the insurers simply were compelled to show up. The author has repeatedly stated that insurance is beyond the scope of this bill, but this is an indemnification bill. Insurance has to be part of the equation. We provided examples to the committee where the insurers, even on the most obvious cases, an electrician blows up a junction box, The insurer tenders the claim to the sub gives the claim to their insurer, and the insurer says, I'm not going to cover it absent litigation. And by the way, the insurer also says, you subcontractor, you cannot settle the claim because that would violate the terms of your policy. It's patently unfair to the general contractor, and we request that insurance be brought into this bill and have the same consequences that the rest of us have. So for these reasons, we are opposed.
Thank you. Others in opposition?
Mr. Chair, members, Paul Gladfelty representing the Associated General Contractors. This is certainly one of those areas that is very complicated and one that you have to try and strike a balance. We believe that a balance can be struck in this area of the law. Unlike the residential situation where there were real problems with insurance. Insurance was unavailable, and as a consequence, what had occurred is that you had a lot of subcontractors who are putting their business on the line every time that they were doing a job. This is a different case as it relates to the construction commercial context. Insurance is available, and the issue then becomes, okay, what happens when you have the owner, you have the general contractor, the subcontractor, and who defends whom? This is really more or less a contract issue to determine in advance who is going to be responsible for defending claims when claims arise. We think that the bill's been improved by determining active versus passive negligence. We think that's an improvement to the bill. But we believe that there are a lot of provisions that are still unclear, and we do want to continue to work with the author and also with the proponents of the bill. But there are several provisions relating to insurance that we think need to be clarified, certainly as it relates to indemnification issues as well. With me today, I have Tim Truax, who's a practitioner in this area, who will raise some specific concerns.
Thank you. Next witness, please.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, my name is Tim Truax. I'm a construction lawyer, and I have been for 25 years, representing owners, general contractors, subcontractors, suppliers, pretty much everybody on any type of construction project. This bill, as the author states, is if the idea is to promote inherent fairness, this bill doesn't get there because it treats general contractors differently than everybody else. Public owners who have by the hundreds, it seems, come up here today and removed their opposition to the bill because of amendments that were added in the last couple of days. Private owners also in 2782 have now defined clearly what they can and can't get indemnity for. General contractors don't have that benefit. That doesn't say anywhere in 2782.05 what a general contractor can and can't get indemnity for, except to say active negligence. Well, for public owners and for private owners, that is well defined in 2782. Additionally, 2782 says that that section does not apply to any insurance contract. And 2782.05 nowhere says that. And the analysis that was done by staff here clearly indicates that the intent of this bill is to affect insurance, especially insurance that's given to general contractors. And so, whereas 2782 says this doesn't apply to insurance, 2782.05 clearly does apply to insurance. In fact, there's a provision that's been added that says this doesn't affect any old insurance policy, but obviously it must be intended to affect a future insurance policy. So what you have is a situation where owners, public and private owners, can insist on getting an additional insured endorsement from the general contractor that indemnifies or that protects the public owner from the public owner's own active negligence. That 2782 clearly allows that. But 2782.05 does not. So general contractors are now going to be forced to give additional insured endorsements up the chain to the public and private owners, and they won't be able to get a backup additional insured endorsement from the subs, who in most cases create the problems because most generals don't do a whole lot of work. So they won't be able to get an additional insured endorsement from the sub that covers the owner's active negligence, but they'll have to give one to the owner for the owner's active negligence. It's completely unfair. It changes the ball game completely. And if the idea is to be fair, then let's be fair and let's treat owners and general contractors and subcontractors who also hire subs. Let's treat them all the same. That's the idea. Then let's do it right, and let's take some time and get it right, because this is being rushed through way too quickly, and it's going to end up getting messed up.
Thank you. Others in opposition?
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, Danny Curtin, California Conference of Carpenters. Normally, I would not be in the middle of an issue like this, which is a dispute between liability of the subcontractors and general contractors. But I have been asked by our organization to get involved. This is a traditional kind of conflict that's been going on in the construction industry for years. I'm not saying one side has more merit than the other side in that dispute, but I am saying that there is havoc in the industry, but it's being created by the economy as much as anything else, with an industry that's 35% unemployed, contractors of all stripes, generals and subcontractors under an enormous economic pressure. There's a lot of finger pointing going on, trying to figure out how people can shift the liability. And if there is an issue that has to be dealt with, it's not clear to me that the crisis in the industry is coming from this liability question, but it should be discussed in a more dispassionate sort of forum than it has been in the last few months. I get the sense that this bill is getting more complicated and perhaps causing more complex issues than the ones they're trying to resolve. So my contention here is that we should push this on a different track and have people come together in the industry and try to isolate this problem in a way that we're having a hard time doing through the legislative process, because everybody's digging their heels in. This industry is in deep, deep trouble. Shifting liability now, just at the beginning of perhaps an economic turnaround, could be very damaging to that turnaround. So I would encourage the author and all of the people involved in this to really sit down and bring this thing back to some sort of a point where everybody can agree, and we're very, very far from that. I think this bill is going to cause more damage than solving of the problem. So I encourage you to hold it up in some capacity and bring all the stakeholders together, and I think that would include the insurance industry, because there is no lack of insurance. There are a lot of problems in the industry, but that's not one of them.
Thank you very much. Others in opposition to the bill?
Nick Camerata on behalf of the California Building Industry Association. I'd like to perhaps take a little different tone. I'd like to thank the sponsors and the author for sitting down with us extensively and working through a number of issues. I think we're about 90% there. I think that what remains are minor technical, almost in the order of typos. And I think there's an agreement on that. I think there's a commitment to effectuate those amendments, and I think once the bill is in print, we have a practice of just not lifting our opposition until it's in print. I have a feeling, though, based on the comments that were made here, that we might be involved in further discussions regarding the bill, but just to let you know where our position is right now.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Others in opposition?
Catherine Pettibone, Civil Justice Association of California. I'd also like to echo those comments. We appreciate the author and the supporters working with opposition. We have some small remaining concerns, but we are encouraged with the progress this bill has made.
Thank you.
Kevin Pedrati, representing the Engineering and Utility Contractors Association. We had previously had no position on this bill, and our council had looked at the bill as proposed to be amended and has recommended that we take an opposed position.
Thank you. Others in opposition? All right. Colleagues, I'm going to first turn to Senator Evans and ask if you would, can you respond to what you identify as the principal concerns that have been raised by the opposition?
Yeah, part of the challenge is to identify what those are, and that's part of the problem that we've had in dealing with this bill, but I think we've gotten much more clarity over the last few weeks. But there does seem to be some differences of opinion even amongst those that are opposing. Some say there are insurance issues and others say they're contractual issues, but let me try to address all of them in some fashion at least. With respect to the public agencies, and perhaps the more experienced lawyer here on this issue, although I do have experience in this area, I have not represented public agencies, but perhaps he may have more to add. But the bill does not allow the public agency any longer to shift liability for its own act of negligence. And that is a public policy that I believe is something that the state of California supports. Active negligence should remain, the liability for active negligence should remain with the negligent party. And that's overall what this bill is trying to do anyway in general. With respect to insurers, we are not in any way letting insurers off the hook. And what's happening now is insurers for the subcontractors are carrying all of the risk, not only for the ultimate liability, but also for the defense of the lawsuit. And that is not a fair situation. And even though there's been, a lot of issues raised to try to maybe muddy the waters here, what we do know is that existing law is not fair. That's something that's very clear. Existing law is not fair, and this bill attempts to try to bring some clarity and some transparency and some fairness back to California law. And I don't believe that the insurance industry, the regulation of the insurance industry should be a part of this bill. If, in fact, we were attempting to amend the insurance code in this bill, we would get a different opposition saying, well, you can't do both things in one bill. And in fact, there has been support expressed from several in the insurance industry. I believe that's been expressed to the committee. Let's see. Oh, the question of the costs and that that under this bill, subcontractors and general contractors will be unable to bear the cost. Under existing law, the subcontractors are unable to bear the costs of the litigation and the defense and the insurance. And that's the problem that we're trying to address here, is the general contractors are shifting all of the risk for the entire construction project onto the subcontractors. And each subcontractor only has a small portion of the overall contract and the overall project. And no one subcontractor sees the entire project from beginning to end. The general contractor does. And so this bill, again, attempts to shift the liability for one's own negligence away from the situation now where the subcontractors are taking all of it.
All right. I have a couple more things to say, but first, colleagues. Mr. Dickinson.
I do have a question regarding the amendments that were taken and referred to by speakers on both sides. So I want to understand what the contention is of the supporters regarding the language related to owners and what doesn't constitute active negligence. Is it that notwithstanding that language under California Supreme Court and U.S. Supreme Court decisions, that if the owner delivers plans that are incomplete to the contractor, then the owner remains liable for any costs incurred associated with the contractor completing those plans or building and then having to do additional work because the plans are incomplete? Is that your position?
It's my position. There's two California Supreme Court cases. The most recent was LA Unified School District, which dealt with the misrepresentation, what constituted that. At the beginning of that decision, it referred back to a case called the D'Souza. The D'Souza case essentially said that there's an implied warranty that plans and specifications, which are given to a contractor by the public entity, are complete, and that the contractor can build it for that. If it turns out they're not complete, the contractor has the legal right to go back and get the additional costs associated with completing the work, and if there are delays, recapture the cost of those delays. So it's clear that that exists. The D'Souza case stems from the Spearin Doctrine, or Spearin case, which deals with the U.S. Navy, which has been around for 20, 30, long time, U.S. Supreme Court case. So my understanding of the law is that under these cases I just cited, essentially a public entity has a duty to pay for any additional work associated with poor plans.
And the author's position is that nothing in this bill, in this language, obviates, mitigates, or otherwise undoes those court decisions.
Correct. And I would point out that the negligence and the liability remains, assuming there's no other intervening act by the public agency, remains with the person who drew up those plans, the licensed professional. So it doesn't go to the general contractor and the sub, it goes the other way.
I understand that. Thank you. And so for the opponents, then, do you disagree with the contention made by the proponents on this point? And if so, how?
Well, first, the contractor has no privity of contract with the architect. So we are limited in our ability to go after the architect if the plans are deficient. And we do disagree. We think, and if the language is not intended to impact the Supreme Court rulings, we would ask that the descriptors in 3 be removed. Then what purpose do those serve if they are not to create confusion in the current situation? The California law, the court decisions clearly state that the public entity is liable, yet we are creating confusion because we're specifically saying with this bill that active negligence is not related to the plans. So what is that intended to do?
So maybe if this bill continues to survive, maybe that's an area of focusing some conversation.
We'll continue having any conversation anybody would like to have, as I have done from the beginning, but I just would have to respectfully disagree with that analysis.
Let me just say, on the process point, this is particularly in the context of the recession we've been living through, an especially important piece of legislation because of the role that construction plays in helping us emerge from the recession. Every economist points to this sector of the economy as being where we've been most efficient and where we have a great upside. It's important. The issues are complex. The author has been working extremely hard to try to find common ground, and the opponents are trying to find common ground as well. I do think that there are aspects of the bill on which further progress can be made in terms of getting to yes on this between, I guess, among the various interests who are involved here. A lot of progress has been made, no question. I think there is more to be had, though, and not merely on what was characterized as a typo kind of an issue. And as discussion ensues in the committee, I would encourage that the author continue her effective efforts to lead a constructive conversation designed to narrow the distance on some of these issues, because I think you can do it. I think it's very possible to do with your leadership here.
If I may, Mr. Chair, I have committed to, if necessary, bring this bill back to Judiciary in the Senate. So if, in fact, there are other more progress that can be made, I've committed to doing that. And because it is my intent to continue having the conversations and make as much constructive progress as we can. I think we've come a long way, and a good deal of that has been due to your committee and your leadership as well.
Other colleagues with questions or comments for the Senator? All right. I don't have a specific additional recommendation to make on how to narrow the gap. I think there are some legitimate concerns that remain outstanding on the legislation, and I very much want to encourage that constructive discussion to continue. Having said that, Ms. Evans, do you wish to close?
I will simply say, again, thank you for your help and the committee consultants' help, and I would ask for an aye vote.
Is there a motion on the bill? The bill's been moved. Is there a second? The bill's been moved and seconded. Call the roll, please.
Fear?
As amended. Aye.
Fear, aye. Wagner? Wagner, no. Adkins? Adkins, aye. Dickinson? Dickinson, aye. Gaines? Gaines, no. Huber? Huffman? Jones? Jones, no. Monning? Monning, aye. Wachowski? Wachowski, aye.
That bill has 5 votes and requires an additional vote as on call. Thank you, Senator.
Thank you, and thank you for all the time.
Of course. All right. So, Mr. Rubio, Senator Rubio has been the soul of patience, having been in and out of this hearing for about 2 hours now. And let me honor that patience and tenacity with the following, please. Let me just, if I could, Senator, before you begin, frame this discussion just a little bit. There are 2 key issues embedded in your bill.
Yes.
One of which is an issue that is new to the bill on this side of the building, having to do with Medi-Cal issues. This bill is headed to the Health Committee. I would recommend I don't want to curtail conversation that either you or members wish to have. I'd recommend that we focus our attention in this committee on the issue that brought it to this committee in the first place, and in the main, deferred discussion on the Medi-Cal issue to the committee which has expertise on Medi-Cal issues. But, Senator, please feel free to focus on anything you'd like.
Certainly. Well, Mr. Chairman, with that, then I will make my comments very brief and specific on the very subject that's germane to this committee. And this bill, SB 484, first let me thank you for presenting it, and good afternoon. This would increase the transparency of the prison health contracts by allowing the Legislative Analyst's Office to inspect a healthcare contract or amendment to a contract. Currently, only the California State Auditor and members of the Joint Legislative Audit Committee have the authority to view these contracts prior to the public becoming 3 years after the contract has been in place. The contract that's currently in statute today with the legislature is a $900 million contract. To me, I think transparency and accountability is important. This bill tries to accomplish that with this very narrow provision of the bill, and I'd respectfully ask for your aye vote.
Thank you, Senator. Your first witness in support, please. Are the witnesses here in support? Witnesses in opposition to the bill? Seeing none, colleagues, are there a motion on the bill? Oh, there is a witness in opposition, but I think in opposition on the Medi-Cal front, indeed? Okay.
Mr. Chair and members, Barbara Glazer with the California Hospital Association. We do have concerns. We are opposed to some language in Section 2 of the bill, so I won't explain. If you would rather I wait until the bill goes to Health Committee, that whatever the chairman prefers.
Well, here's my speculation, colleagues. I think with regard to the issue on which Mr. Rubio focused at the inception, there is likely to be general agreement, or at least sufficient agreement, to move the bill to the committee, which has expertise on the issue Ms. Glazer mentions. We can have the discussion here. Members can raise the issue if they want to, but I think it makes most sense for that conversation to happen in the committee that actually owns expertise of that issue. So I'll take guidance from that. Mr. Monti.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Senator Rubio. I just want to thank the chair for that framing. I totally support the objectives of the first component of transparency. Glad to support the bill moving today. I do look forward to having an informed conversation on the Medi-Cal component in health, and I won't cross that line today, and would look forward to working with you and your staff between now and next week to see if we might make some progress with you and the opposition before next Tuesday. But thank you for the initiative on the transparency component.
Appreciate it. Look forward to those discussions.
Ms. Atkins.
Thank you. I will just quickly say, since I am on the Health Committee, that is the piece I have want more discussion on. So happy to move it forward today and take that up at the appropriate time.
Yes, and then members will have an opportunity on the floor if they're not satisfied with the resolution, and the Health Committee should get out of that committee to have this conversation again. So, Mr. Dickinson.
I join in the sentiment that's been expressed. I want to say I appreciate Senator Rubio taking up this issue on the point that we're discussing here, and actually would take the view that he's being too modest in how far he's willing to go. In the Accountability Committee, we tried to look at this contract, which is costing us, as taxpayers in the state of California, $900 million, as he noted, and it's not available to see for members of this body. So we are voting to spend up to $900 million without the right to see what it's getting spent on. I personally find that quite problematic. I appreciate this step in the direction of having someone who we have access to see it, but I think that it's a first step, frankly, and we ought to be looking at going even further. And I would move the bill.
Thank you.
I'll second it.
And seconded. Further questions or comments for the senator? Seeing none, Senator, wish to close?
Respectfully ask for your aye vote. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Very well. Call the roll, please.
Fear.
Aye.
Fear, aye. Wagner. Wagner, aye. Adkins. Adkins, aye. Dickinson. Dickinson, aye. Gaines. Gaines, no. Huber. Huffman. Jones. Monning.
Aye.
Monning, aye. Wachowski. Wachowski, aye.
That bill has 6 votes and is out. Congratulations, Senator. So now, in lieu of Mr. Wright, we have Mr. DiOrio, who is here on Mr. Wright's measure, which is item number 5, SB 422. Mr. DiOrio, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Members, Mr. Wright has tied up a committee and make this quick. SB 422 is a simple bill that adds some clarity regarding civil and criminal liability for physicians and public health officials dealing with HIV information. We worked with a number of members of the groups. There's no opposition to the bill. It's supported by the California Academy of Preventive Medicine, the Infectious Disease Association of California, Beyond AIDS. I have Dr. Ron Hattis here, who's an expert in the field, been working on this legislation in various forms for a number of years for any technical questions.
Move the matter.
Bill's been moved and seconded, and I would just, because of the hour, suggest that there is no opposition formally to the bill, so if you'd have limited testimony, that would be helpful.
Thank you. I'm Dr. Ron Hattis. I'm a physician who treats HIV and I've been a county health officer as well, so I have the various perspectives on the bill. I'm the president of Beyond AIDS, which is the sponsor of the bill. The committee consultant's analysis is excellent and very comprehensive, so in the interest as a physician of having a well-nourished committee, I'll try to be brief so you can get to lunch and won't be redundant. Basically, what this bill does is it allows a physician to communicate with public health and ask for assistance in partner services, which include notifying people who've been exposed to HIV. There are thousands of people in California who are being exposed and don't even know it. This removes barriers in the law currently and allows the patient to consent to information being turned over to public health in order to be interviewed about who's exposed and get the partners notified. I'm available to answer any technical questions on that. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Others in support?
Ryan Spencer with the California Medical Association in support.
Mr. Chair and members, Rand Martin on behalf of the AIDS Healthcare Foundation in support of the bill. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The bill's been moved and seconded. Colleagues, questions or comments for Mr. DiOrio on behalf of Mr. Wright? Seeing none, Mr. DiOrio, wish to close?
SVI vote.
Call the roll, please.
Fear?
Aye.
Fear, aye. Wagner? Aye. Wagner, aye. Atkins? Atkins, aye. Dickinson? Dickinson, aye. Gaines? Gaines, aye. Huber? Huffman? Jones? Jones, aye. Monning? Monning, aye. Wykowski? Wykowski,
That bill has sufficient votes and is out. Now, Senator Weiland, who's been in and out a few times, is about to be here for the last matter. We're also about to lift the call on a number of bills, and I would urge absent members of the committee to join us immediately so we can have the calls lifted and a resolution of those other pieces of legislation achieved. And while we're waiting for Mr. Weiland, colleagues, I do want to thank you for hanging in there. This was a hearing destined to last a long time because of the complexity and number of issues, and I appreciate it very much. Senator Weiland, welcome. You waited last week, you waited this week. Thanks for your patience. Good afternoon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm running back and forth between GO. SB 146 is a cleanup bill pursuant to SB 788 of last year, which created licensed professional clinical counselors. California was the only state in the country that did not have this category of mental health professional. What this bill does is simply insert language that includes LPCCs in statute where it currently has licensed social workers and marriage and family therapists. It's very straightforward. It simply inserts them in the code where the others are.
Thank you. Bill's been moved and seconded. Your first witness in support, please.
I'm Dean Porter, the Executive Director of the California Association for Licensed Professional Clinical Counselors. We're the sponsors of this bill, and we ask for your vote.
Thank you. Others in support of Mr. Weiland's measure? Is there any opposition to the Senator's bill? Seeing none, questions or comments for Senator Weiland?
I might just add, Mr. Chairman, that the fees associated with this bill are completely similar to those in every other category and simply cover costs.
Thank you. I'll take that as your close. Call the roll.
Fear?
Aye.
Fear, aye. Wagner? Aye. Wagner, aye. Atkins? Atkins, aye. Dickinson? Dickinson, aye. Gaines? Gaines, aye. Huber? Huffman? Jones? Jones, aye. Monning? Aye. Monning, aye. Wykowski? Aye.
Okay, that bill is out. Congratulations, Senator.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
We are about to lift the call on numerous matters. There are a couple members who have conflicting committee engagements, and I recognize that, but it is time for them to return so we can conclude our agenda for the day. In the meantime, members who wish to add on to votes which they have not been able to participate in should do so at this moment.
I'd like to thank my colleagues.
I just want to thank all of my colleagues at the Assembly Judiciary Committee, Kevin Baker, Leora Gershenson, Tom Clark, Anthony Liu, and Nick, our intern. They did just an incredible job this last couple of weeks with these analyses, and so great work, everybody.
Huffman, they said he's 15 minutes out. 15 minutes out. And then Huber is next to her, so she's presenting.
All right, you know what? Let's see how far we can get. So item number 3, SB 201 by Senator DeSaulnier. The vote is 5-2. Chair voting aye. Call the absent members.
Huber, Huffman, Jones. Jones, no.
Okay. Item number 4, SB, that continues to be on call. SB 293, Senator Padilla. Vote is 5-0. Chair voting aye. Call the absent members, please.
Gaines. Gaines, aye. Huber, Huffman, Jones.
Yes.
Jones, aye. Monning.
That bill has sufficient votes and is out. Item number 6, SB 459 by Senator Corbett. The vote is 5-2. Chair voting aye. Call the absent members, please.
Dickinson.
Aye.
Dickinson, aye. Huffman, Jones. No. Jones, no.
That bill has sufficient votes and is out. Item number 7, SB 474 by Senator Evans. The vote is 5-3. Chair voting aye. Please.
Huber, Huffman.
Okay, we'll return to that one. So on call. Item 12, SB 651 by Mr. Leno. 5-2 is the vote currently. Chair voting aye.
Huber, Huffman, Jones. No. Jones, no.
That remains on call. Item 13, SB 746, Senator Liu. The vote is 5-0. Chair voting aye.
Gaines. No. Gaines, no. Huffman, Jones. No. Jones, no. Monning.
Aye.
Monning, aye.
The vote has sufficient votes and is out. Item number 14, SB 757 by Senator Liu. The vote is 4-1. Chair voting aye. Call these members, please.
Dickinson. Aye. Dickinson, aye. Gaines. No. Gaines, no. Huffman, Jones. No. Jones, no. Monning. Aye. Monning, aye.
That bill has sufficient votes and is out. Lastly, item number 15, SB 823 by Senator Corbett. The vote is 5-0. Chair voting aye.
Dickinson. Aye. Dickinson, aye. Gaines. No. Gaines, no. Huffman, Jones. No. Jones, no.
Okay. So that means that there are 3 items that remain on call. Items 3 to SB 201, item 7, SB 474, and item 12, SB 651.
I am also thanking Cindy Fisher and Sabah Hajmat for incredible work this last, 15 years?
Don't ask.
We'd also like to thank our co-counsel, Mark Redmond, for amazing work this past couple months.
All right, so we're going to lift the call again. We have this continuing issue of members with conflicting obligations, which is difficult to handle, of course. So on item 3, SB 201, Senator DeSaulnier, the vote is 5-2, chair voting aye. Call the absent members.
Huber. Huber, aye. Huffman.
That bill has enough votes and is out. Item number 7, SB 474 by Senator Evans. The vote is 5-3, chair voting aye. Call the absent members.
Huber. Huber, aye. Huffman.
That bill has sufficient votes and is out. Finally, item number 12, SB 651 by Senator Leno. The vote is 5-2, chair voting aye. Please call the absent members.
Huber. Huber, aye. Huffman.
That bill has sufficient votes and is out, and therefore all the matters that had been on call are now out. Thank you, Ms. Huber, for racing back here. I know it's tough to do these things all at once. All right, I'm going to stay a few minutes to allow absent members to add on as they wish, except for that formality at this point. There's no further business before the committee.